Aloha and welcome to this week's video. So this week I'm going to be making my first piece of the year, which is always exciting. And it's actually going to be similar to my last piece. Definitely didn't plan on that. So I got a custom order for a Nif'oti, which is what I made in my last set of videos. Except for this one, it was going to be designed after the metal Nif'oti. So the Nif'oti, the Samoan fighting knife, is one of the only Polynesian weapons that implemented heavy use of metals. And so there's both wood and metal versions of these that were used in various combats and wars throughout the history of Samoa. I'm going to be making my piece out of wood, just like the previous one, but the overall design layout is going to be very similar to the metal piece that you saw on my phone earlier. What I'm doing here is I had a very beautiful piece of dark curly koa, and I wanted to optimize the amount of wood that I get out of that piece. And so rather than trying to fit the hook into that one piece, I'm going to be gluing on a additional section of koa wood. It's a lighter grain koa onto here, and that will be my hook. Plus, I think having this lighter grain koa contrasting with a darker grain koa will make for a better appeal. And it'll give the overall piece just more balance. The lighter grain koa is also pretty curly. It has a nice grain to it. It is just a lighter grain. It's probably more of an edgewood than this darker koa here, which is likely either a heartwood or just a lot old. Well, actually, this koa is older. I know that much, but it's most likely a heartwood. The first thing that I wanted to do after I cut out the general shape on the bandsaw is I wanted to rough in a swirl pattern. So on the handle, I wasn't just going to do a straight cylindrical handle all the way down. It's going to be wrapped on the top section and bottom section, just like that image was. And then on the in-between, I wanted to put a swirl pattern. Just to make sure I didn't shape too far in one direction, I went ahead and roughed in the swirl pattern, and then I got to shaping the rest of the piece. It's a simple design, but it was actually a little bit challenging to shape just because the angles and the lines are so elongated. So the blade isn't going to be perfectly flat. I have a single bevel that I'm going to be putting on it, and then that's going to come into a ridge, kind of like a diamond shape, a center ridge that'll go all the way down the piece. I decided to do it that way to give it more strength. That way, if you were to use this, if you were to swing it, it would have a lot more material in the wood. It'd give it a little bit more weight, but more importantly, it'd give it more strength. And so I'm going to be tapering on the back end, so it actually does create a diamond shape if you were to look down the top of the piece. And tapering on the back end is to help reduce some of the weight. It's still a little bit too heavy, too front heavy, and I needed to balance out the blade with the handle a little bit more. And so that's why I'm creating that design layout. Once I have it mostly shaped, I'm going to be working on the swirl pattern first, and then I can start sanding heavily on the rest of the piece. I don't have the swirl pattern finished, but I do have it mostly complete. Pretty much what I did is I roughed it in with the angle grinder, and then I made the lines deeper with my tungsten carbide bit and my Dremel, and then the rest of it is all just hand sanding, just twisting up the sanding discs and then using that to keep good spacing and putting those down. And then the sanding on the blade is just removing the material, making sure all the lines are symmetrical on both sides, and that they all keep good shape. The biggest challenge was the blade. I wanted to make sure that the blade was straight all the way down. It was in parallel with the handle, and so nothing was twisted or bent out of shape or in a different area. So I just wanted to make sure all of that was looking good. And the rest of it was just a lot of cleanup and a lot of basic sanding. So I spent, geez, I don't know how long sanding this piece, but it actually took surprisingly a long time to sand. Probably just because of its size. It uses up quite a bit of area. So even though it's a more simplistic piece, it just took forever. And then I sanded it up to 320, and I got my camera set up. I usually record on both my phone and on I use a GoPro for my camera. I don't have a expensive camera. I totally messed up. My camera's way too close to the GoPro. I didn't even notice. I didn't even catch most of this piece for oiling it, but I did catch some of it, so you can see the grain here. It's an absolutely gorgeous piece of koa wood. You can see the curl and that 3D effect. It just looks awesome. It's a very beautiful piece. I was very pleased with the way it was looking, and that line, those ridges came out perfect. They are just straight, and they're perfectly in line with the rest of the piece. So it just has really good balance, and the artistic appeal of it is really nice as well. And then I really like the contrasting colors between that lighter grain koa and the darker grain koa. It's a little bit darker now because the oil is still wet. As it dries, that will lighten up a little bit, not a lot, but a little, and that contrast will continue to grow between the dark grain and light grain. So the last step before I finish sealing up the piece is going to be lashing on the hand wrap. I'm just doing a very basic lash. I'm wrapping it a few times, and then I do a quick over knot, and then I wrap it sometimes and tie in another knot and wrap it in sometimes. And so the interval knots just help it stay wrapped, and then theoretically, if you're fighting someone, if it gets damaged or cut, it's only going to unravel slightly. It'll continue to hold with those interval knots that are in place. And then once the entire thing is finished lashing, I just tie off the ends, and then I tuck those ends underneath the lashing to kind of hide them and make it so you don't feel them on your hands. So that way it looks better and it feels better in the hand. And then I really like the way that twist turned out. I think that turned out just awesome. You'll get a much better view of it here in just a minute once I show the finished piece. After this step, the last step is just some final coats, and then it's done. So we're going to go ahead and skip to that, and here is the final or finished piece, the Nif'oti. Man, did it turn out absolutely gorgeous. I'm in the shade right now, so it's a little bit harder to see, so I'm going to go ahead and move over to some sunlight here in just a minute. But I love the way that it turned out. I love the contrasting on the handle and that twisted intersection. I like the contrasting colors between the two different grains of koa wood. It just looks absolutely gorgeous. Beautiful piece. And then here's a look of it in the sun. You can really see the 3D effect on the koa wood. Man, that looks awesome. Oh man, just totally in love with it. I just love the way that looks. And I got that nice and straight, that ridge. And then here you can see that kind of diamond shape looking down there where it widens and then tapers back down again. And then it comes into the hook. And then on the back ridge, I have a slight flat plane. That's just so it's easier to hold. And the balance on this piece just feels amazing. I was really excited to test it. A little bit nervous because I did put a little bit finer of an edge. So the edge is pretty thick, but the apex of the edge is still, I made it, sharp. I don't know if sharp's a good word, but kind of sharp. So here's just a couple final looks. And really the only testing I did with this was chopped at this pineapple. I didn't hit the ballistics gel just because the ballistics gel is actually pretty tough. If you don't hit it with something actually very sharp, it will just bounce off. Shark teeth cut into it, obviously, but I've just noticed that if it's not something very strong, sharp or a lot of energy into a fine point, it just won't do much. And on that pineapple, it cut that first section so well that I couldn't help it and cut it again, and man, it was awesome. I hope you enjoy watching the video. This piece was a ton of fun. Great start to the new year. Mahalo plenty for everyone, and I'll see you next time. Aloha.